Growing the Future podcast is brought to you by Eberhard Ag Solutions. Join us as we talk to top entrepreneurs in the agricultural space about their methods of obtaining success in their endeavors. And now, your host, Dan Eberhard.
Right on, well, we're here for day 2 of AgSmart. I'm here with Jonathan Small,
Dan.
round 2.
Pleasure again.
And so did you present today and yesterday or just
No,
today?
just today.
Oh, nice.
Just today.
So one off.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did that go for you?
It went well.
Yeah.
It's a presentation that is really geared towards young farmers. I first did it for the Canadian Young Farmers Federation, and then and Canadian Young Cattlemen, and because it was really pitched, at that group more than anything because of the perennial problems that they face getting started in farming, which is it's expensive to get into, right? And so today's audience was more of a mix. Quite a lot of guys already well established, and it certainly has application. The stuff I was talking about would have application for them.
Okay.
And also, of course, for them, it also has an impact on their succession, right? Their succession plans and the challenge they always seem to face, which is, well, one child could be the successor, but not 2 or 3 or 4. And sometimes there are 2 or 3 or 4 who would really like a chance and cannot, right? Because the farm is not big enough, or there's not enough wealth, right? And it's not like those families haven't slaved and worked hard and done a really great job throughout their lives, but it has taken a lifetime literally to get to that point, and there's enough for 1 or 2 children. And so the sort of central thrust, actually, I read a great book when I first came to Canada called Knowledge Rich Ranching by a guy called Alan Nation. It's a pretty dated book now, but certainly it's a good read. And he talked about how farmers make money and the novel ways to do it, which didn't require lots of money to go and do it and could make a lot of money. And
how dated is that?
And at that time, I just arrived in Canada. At that time, 2000, 2001, I was meeting ranchers in Saskatchewan who were really doing quite well, relatively speaking anyway. And I'd never seen that, not in the old country. We just come out of a 7-year border closure and mad cow disease and all of that and so on. I'd never seen beef producers make money, and I thought, well, this is kind of neat, right? And then by 2002, that had all changed. It reversed because we had our own BSE crisis. How do you go ranching if you have no money? And that got me thinking about that whole idea of, well, it is a god-awful expensive business to get into. I mean, at that time in Saskatchewan, you could buy land and the land would pay for itself, but those days are gone.
20 years ago, you're saying?
Yeah. Exactly, and
those days are gone.
They're gone, and I never saw them in the old country. Land has always been beyond its economic value.
So you're coming from a different paradigm.
Yeah, so and that's exactly the word that I was using. I was talking about challenging the ag paradigm, right? So the ag paradigm is, well, the way you go farming. You talk to any farmer, most young farmers, is, well, the way you go farming is you buy land, and you buy machines, and you buy cows, and you own all of this stuff, and then you make money doing that, and then you buy more. And that's fine. That works. That model has worked very well. But the old rules are applying less and less. Around here, you'll pay $5,000-$6,000 an acre for land. Right? That land is never going to pay for itself. So there needs to be some other land to help with that, right? So the question is well, then how do you break into that if you're poor? Which is the definition of a young farmer is by nature they're poor, right?
Yeah.
Even with mum and dad's help, relatively speaking, they're poor, right?
So just to clarify here, you're talking ranching and or broadacre grain?
I'm talking about broadacre grain, right? So the example that I read about originally that got the gears turning was ranching, but actually I then applied that to grain, and I was in Saskatchewan, so it was all grain farms, and it's no different.
Yeah.
Right? So. So that got me thinking about, so what is that paradigm, right? And the paradigm is, well, you own everything. You might rent some stuff, but you basically try and own everything. And you either own it outright or you're making payments on it, but either way, you're owning it, right? And those businesses grow very slow, right? Because you can only go as fast as you can grow your equity and leverage more money, right? And I got to looking then at, well, so what are the characteristics of those farms? And you look at their balance sheets, and the balance sheets are all the same, right? So roughly speaking, sort of anything from 70 to 90% of the capital in that business is tied up in land. And then the rest is about another 10 to 15% is equipment,
Really?
buildings.
I thought that would be higher.
No.
Interesting.
And then the least amount is in the working capital, the stuff that actually generates your cash flow, the stuff that actually works for you, right? So inputs, expenses, all of those things, but primarily inputs, right? And then you're going to look at, well, so how do those individual asset classes, how do they perform? And well, land's not a bad performer. It generally rises in value. You know, Alberta, a good average would be, well, so 90% of my investment portfolio, if you look at it like that, is going to grow pretty solidly, reliably at about 5% a year. Some years more, some years a bit less, right? And then I've got my buildings and my equipment. Well, that doesn't grow in value. We know that goes down, right? So if that was in your pension fund, you might want to get rid of that asset class after a while because it never ever makes money, right? So,
but you like it.
But you like it, right? Well, and it's necessary up to a point, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the working capital, which is 7-8% of the total capital, and that a good average on that is about a 50% return, right? And sometimes certain parts of that working capital, your crop inputs, are going to do 2, 3, 4, 500% return. Right, depending upon the season and the crop and the nature of the input, right? So very high returns on the working capital, but also very high risk, right? Farmers pee their pants just about every spring when they put all that money in the ground, and it's only 8% of their wealth going in there because they recognize that, I might not get this back. Right? That's why there was an insurance guy talking about this today, because that's exactly where GARS comes in, is actually your most important asset, I would argue, that gives you the highest returns but also the greatest risk. You should make every effort to protect that. You need that working capital. Right?
How many producers are thinking of these or aware of this pie chart that you speak of?
I don't think very many.
8% of my money returns 50%.
Farmers don't tend to look at their farms like that.
Mm-hmm.
The moment you break it down like that, they will all nod. They all recognize what you're talking about.
They relate.
Yeah.
They know it to be true.
So challenging the ag paradigm, right? Mm-hmm. The sort of thrust of that presentation is, how about you reverse that? How about you have 80% of your money not in land but in working capital? What does that farm look like, right? Because that.
And
farm,
you had some case studies, or you showed how that could be done.
Showed how it can be done, and I've seen a small number of farmers, young farmers especially, do that or do that to some extent, right?
Doesn't everybody have that problem now? Because working capital is becoming less and less abundant in our current marketing.
Well, I mean, the things that influence working capital
are
are profitability, ultimately cash flow, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the challenge with working capital and farms and risk management is that when farmers self-insure, and actually anytime you buy insurance or not, anytime you buy insurance, you're going to have a deductible. You're going to self-insure that part, right? So, so what farmers use as their insurance fund, right? What insurance companies use as their insurance company is the reinsurers and the people who back them up, who say, yeah, I'm good for the money, right? If the worst comes to the worst, then I'm writing a check to you. You're not writing a check to me, right? And that's a big pool of liquidity, and it's global. It's huge, right? For a farmer, his pool of liquidity is his working capital, right? It does double duty. And I think not many see it like that, but that's the reality is, those guys who back up insurance companies, they've got a pool of liquidity which they have for that purpose for the most part, right? It's not, another business doesn't depend on it. For a farmer, his business depends on that working capital, and yet he also, when he self-insures, puts that on the line, which is why it's so terrifying every May when they spend all that money, because they know that, well, I haven't got anything to back this up. If I lose this, it's all I've got. And
then you have to dip into that 80% that you're really.
That's what happens.
Whoever.
Right? And that's fine if that.
Land,
yeah. So that's that land base can be a good fund, right? But they have to be willing and able to basically to sell it, right, in order to raise that money. Now they may sell it by remortgaging it, right, and they can buy it for a second time or maybe a third time, right, and that's how they would release that, right? But if that event happens just after you leverage that land to buy the neighbor's place, then you can't necessarily go back to the bank and release more liquidity to fill in that working capital hole that appeared, right, through your decision about self-insurance, right? Because the bank has said that you're leveraged enough already. We're not loaning you any more against this land, right? So it matters, So the land has to be free and clear, and for the most part, growing farms don't have an awful lot of that, right? And having worked, for many years in the business, I've probably too many times had to work in situations where that went wrong. Right?
Well, sometimes that's maybe the only way that people start really looking at some of these things is when Terry talks about it a lot. It's TSN turning point on the farm. I think it was 2007. He was talking about earlier. They had that point where they had to do that soul searching, go to the bank, bring in the advisors, and kind of look. So you're saying if I'm an established farm and I have 80% of my wealth is in farmland, and 8% of that wealth goes in every year to make that farmland produce a crop and yield and bring my revenue above my expenses, that I should actually look at reproportioning my portfolio in such a way that maybe I could invest in more. I could have more working capital, of which there's a higher return, and don't worry, or even potentially reduce my amount of.
I'm not actually saying that, because that's a very unappetizing prospect for most guys.
You don't think it's palatable? That's why I wanted to ask.
For an established farmer, right?
Yeah.
If you're a 25-year-old just starting out, and you can maybe lay your hands on, with mum and dad's help, you can lay your hands on $1 million between mum and dad and leveraging that equity, right? You give a young farmer $1 million. Around here, well, they might just buy a quarter section and have enough money left over to grow a crop on it, right? So they got a 160-acre farm, and let's assume that somehow they find a way to have equipment for that, because they'll use mum and dad's,
think
right?
about that, $1 million.
So how many acres do you need? How many acres do you need? Because I got this question all the time. How big does my farm have to be before I can give up my day job? Because I don't enjoy swinging wrenches. I want to drive tractors and I want to farm, right? And so the ag paradigm says, well, so you get some money, you get a windfall, you go and buy your first quarter of land, right? And now what, right? Now you take that same $1 million and say, what if I don't own any land? What if I treat this whole $1 million as working capital? How many acres can I farm now? And it's often 4 or 5 times as many, right? Nice. So now I've got an 800-acre farm, right? Well, how much profit do you think that will make compared to the 160-acre farm, right? And ultimately, if I want to be part of the Ag Paradigm Club, I want to be like mum and dad, right? And buy land, I need profit for that. So if I stopped acquiring more land at that point, which one of those two farmers is going to be able to afford a down payment on another quarter section soonest? Okay. It's the one who's farming 800 acres every time, right? And so the real paradox is, if your aim is to be, have a farm like, the ag paradigm, and it is for most of them, and I can see why, and I would support it, right? It's a great life, and it's a great way to build wealth in the long term. The paradox is you would get there faster by rejecting that model at the outset and working your way into that model later on. You take 2 identical twins, one follows the paradigm, one says, no, I'm not gonna buy any land for the first 10 years, I'm just gonna grow my farm, right? Yeah. He gets to optimum size quicker, he builds his profits quicker, and ultimately he will build equity faster that way than the other brother who's just watching his land go up 5% a year.
Is that a hard thing to coach? Is it counterintuitive to what people want to do?
Oh, totally. That's why it's a paradigm, right?
True.
So I had this actually not long after reading Alan Nation's book, and my ideas were forming around grain farming. I was in our MNP boardroom in Regina with a farmer. I guess you'd say he was a young farmer. He wasn't starting out, and he was of a farming background, and he got it immediately. And being the person that he is, he went full on, right? 100% proof, and took the concept further. Within 3 years of that date, he was farming 5,000 acres. He owned a quarter section, which he owned at the beginning of that, right? So he didn't sell that; he kept that. He was farming 5,000 acres. He owned a sprayer and a quarter section, and he was growing just lentils. He was 100% lentils every year, right? Because he was renting land, right? That whole model was built on other people's land. He found farmers who were 50-50 durum summer fallow, said, let me rent in between your durum crops. I promise you, you'll get back perfect weed control. You'll get all that nitrogen, and I'll pay more rent than anybody else. And so he had fresh land every year, and he made a lot of money.
And you were coaching.
Well, I coached him as far as that point. He virtually coached me after that, because he went one step further, because he developed that whole thing based around relationships and trust with people. So he had access to land. That's the challenge, is to really pursue that model, is having access to enough land, right, that you can get to size without being forced to buy it all. And so in the end, for most young farmers or mature farmers, it ends up being a balance. You probably won't get to be 100% rented.
No.
But
maybe you don't want to be.
But the closer you are to that, then the faster you'll add that owned land, and eventually you become a victim of your own success, and you're getting that low return on investment of that traditional farm, but it's nice and safe.
It's the best kind of victim to be.
And it's a great, that's right, and it's a great way to move wealth between generations too. So I commend it, right? The question is, how much time have you got to get there?
So my dad is closing on 70. I think he's 68. And
so if you told him this,
my brother's
shake his head.
40. Yeah, I mean, Dad's
just confirmed.
Dad's not really at that stage where he's at a lot of whole new things, and he's been saying for a while, oh, maybe we should just have less, and we should do less, and we should have less people, and there should be less. And it's like, well, hey, we're not into less. He's like, but I guess my question is, so with my dad being 68, it's a 15,000 acre grain farm on the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border. And my brother's 40, and they're working on succession. But should he also be working on, what do you call that? Portfolio allocation in terms of, or what do you call that?
Well, I liken it to what people like me, where my equity is, which is in investments and funds and stuff like that, right? And ultimately that's what it is for a farmer, because that's what's going to sustain them in their old age, and hopefully will sustain the family in the future. So you look at that as if it were an RSP, and say, if you were imagine you were sat down with your wealth manager at the end of the year, and you were looking at the annual report on the asset classes and how they performed, and he said, well, you've got 80% of your money in this class here. It's a physical asset. It's generating capital appreciation of about 5% a year. You might be okay with that, especially in this day and age. It's probably not bad, right? And then we got this asset class here that actually for the last 50 years it's lost about 15% a year, right? But I still think you should have about 15% of your money in that, right? And then at this point you're starting to think, what's this? What kind of drugs is this guy on? And then I've got the least amount in this class over here. And it can return anything from 0 to 300%, but probably averages about 50%, right? But we have the smallest amount in here, right? What would you ask him at that point, right? I think there'd be some legitimate questions there as to, well, couldn't we take a bit more out of these two here and put it over here? I don't want to take a lot of risk, and you tell me it's very risky, but is there a way we can manage the risk? Well, actually today there is. I mean, the thing that young farmer I told you about, right? He ran that system great until 2004, and we had a frost, 24th of August, something like that, I think, that year.
Yeah.
And his 5,000 acres of lentils turned into what he described 5,000 acres of feed peas, right? And he didn't lose money, right? Because he was super efficient, right? But he didn't make any either, and he wasn't happy with that. And then it happened again the next year, not as bad, right? And so he said, that's it, I'm out. There's better businesses than this, because I did a perfect job both years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he went on to become even wealthier in an unrelated business, because that was the nature of the guy, right? But the point is, he's back in those days, right? That
you had this already in 2000. You were working with this.
Yeah, I knew him then, right? So it was probably 2001. We had that conversation, and he adopted it pretty soon after that. Maybe it was even.
And the conversation is probably more pertinent today with what's happened with land values and working capital.
So the key thing about that kind of business model, though, with if you truly flip that balance sheet, 80% of your money is in working capital, is you better be able to manage all that risk, right? And back then, there was no tool really to do that. There was crop insurance, right? And that certainly helped, but there was nothing really geared towards insuring the working capital itself. Today, of course there is. That's kind of why I'm here, right? So I'll do the advertisement, but that's exactly what production cost insurance does, right? If he would have had that, those 5,000 acres of inputs would have been secure, right? Now, you pay for that, right? Because you're going to pay somebody else to use their pool of capital. Right? But it would have. It may well have kept him in it. I'm not. I don't think he missed farming when he left it because he's a brilliant guy, right? So I think he's had a great life. He's retired now.
Too bad he left farming.
Yeah.
He retired.
Yeah. Well, he's so wealthy, so he's enjoying his family, and good for him, right? But yeah, it may have kept him in a bit longer. It may have done him a favor. I don't know. I mean, I think he did very well what he went on to, right? But not everybody's going to make that decision. You know, most farmers they're going to stick with it, thick or thin, right? We know that, and so as I say, you don't manage that business in the same way as you manage the one that's got that land safety net. And the problem is that, you know, the guys my age in farming now, when they bought their first quarter of land, in many cases, right, that quarter of land paid for itself. You didn't need another quarter to go with it, or 10 more quarters, and the profits from those to do it, as you do today, right? So, you know, the game has changed as well. That, you know, that where I come from, you know, the old country, a lot of my clients owned no land. That was the model, right? It was too expensive, too hard to get, so they were tenant farmers. And they were really good farmers, right? Because you had to pay that rent on time or your business was gone, right? So they always had
a lot
cash
of competition.
Ready. Yeah, a lot of competition.
So if you're increasing your percentage in your portfolio of working capital, so to speak, then ensuring that becomes sort of more critical.
Right.
Because
so
usually you're buffering that with like all the wealth in your land.
Exactly, right. So you need a commensurate risk management plan to go with that. And if you're not prepared to do that, then don't pursue that model. Stick with the, you know, the traditional model, and that's fine. That'll still make you very wealthy if you're good at what you do. But if you're a really, really good manager, you know, if you're a young farmer and you're a really good manager, and you're capable of managing 5,000 acres profitably, and it takes you 20 years to get to that, how much have you left on the table compared to getting to 5,000 acres even 10 years sooner?
So is Terry an ideal candidate? Like, what's the nuts and bolts? So how would he?
I suspect that Terry has done that. That 15,000 acres, you don't own all of that. That's how he's driven it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I say, what I'm suggesting is not you go excuse the words, but you know, you go balls deep on this and go 100%. I mean, I've given an example of somebody who did, but the more you can resemble that, right, the faster you get there. I mean, to be farming 15,000 acres at age 40, you have to have adopted some of those principles, right?
Yeah, through a frost in 2004 and your bankruptcy in 2007, and all the better advice of everybody who knows you.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And so, what's the level of awareness of this, or what's the acceptance of this in the ag community? Like, when you go to people with this, you say they agree, but like, how many know this and are working on this, or is this a brand new paradigm?
Well, I think it's not really. Well, I guess expressed to that extreme, it's
way out
new.
there.
It's way out there.
And you're saying we should just work
and,
towards
you know, if you ran this by your 70-year-old dad, it would just convince him that you are completely mad, right? So the older the audience, the less accepting they are, because they've proven otherwise. But you know, their origins are rooted at a different time, right, when it was easier. I'm saying the game has changed, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to go back to $500 land, right? Not around here. So you have to deal with the reality you're at.
We had a mix of rented land for a really long time, but it wasn't until my brother got involved that they really started scaling the farm, and then they ended up scaling 10 times what Dad usually did. But
so I would say, you know, even for the established guy, the principles would still be very similar. That actually you maybe should have a much higher ratio of rented to owned than you do. And do you need? You got to look very hard at the capital you have invested on the equipment size and so on. It's usually the biggest downfall, right? The biggest waste that happens on farms is over mechanization and so on. So you have to be very lean on that.
Very efficient on
and
that
you
side.
have to be a super good, I mean, if you're going to manage that much working capital, you better be a really good agronomist or really, really good at livestock husbandry and marketing and finance, right? So you also got to invest heavily in skills and knowledge and stuff like that. It's not for the average guy, because what's that commercial? Life comes at you fast, right? That kind of business model, life comes at you real fast, right? So you've got to know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I might be here, it might sound like I'm trying to sell the model, but actually I think it's a relatively small number of people can really pull that off well, right? But if you're 25.
25, you keep saying 25.
Yeah,
I
well, if
love
you're
it.
25
Yeah.
and you start doing that at age 25, right, and then you do that for the next 30 years until you're 55, and at that point you're thinking or planning succession. In most cases, your brother's more enlightened in that he's planning it at 40, which is great, but most it's not until mid-50s that it happens. Well, if you've done that for 30 years, right, that transforms that discussion around that kitchen table, because actually now that farm is big enough that, you know what, you could split it into 3 or 4 parts. Have a comfortable retirement and have all 4 of your kids farming without them having to own the same farm together, and all the perils that can go along with that, right? That decision suddenly became so much easier. No need for fights. Everybody's got a viable farm, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, we've got one 4,000 acre farm and 3 kids that want to farm, right? So you know what? Right now, those kids, have probably got to think in these terms, right? You split that farm 3 ways, right? Now they've now got farms that are probably too small to provide them with a living, but they're off to a good start, right? So, right, they need to pay attention to that, right? They can grind away on 1,500 acres, right, in a day job, or consider some other ways to do it.
Tough place to be.
Don't own your machinery, right? How about that?
Grinding
Imagine-
away with 1,500 acres at a day job is the reason that I'm not farming. Plus, I would suck at it. But I mean, that's all I saw ever growing up, and I didn't have enough knowledge or willpower to say I'm going to redefine that. Regardless, like my brother said, I'm going to farm, even if I'm going to farm for somebody else. I love to farm. I was like, why would I want to have a day job to support a business? It's just
Right.
not. I wasn't that crazy about the work.
I've lost count of the young guys I've met who are working the patch here in Alberta,
Right.
or heavy duty mechanic or something like that. They really, really want to farm, and they don't know when's the right time. And long before that point, they get married, they start a family, and now that decision just got much harder, right? Because if I screw this up now, I can't just return to snakes and ladders, start at the bottom again, because I got to think about my wife and my 2 kids, right? So I've got to keep that steady income, right? And now it stretches way out into the future, and you see the pain, right?
I love when someone with superior knowledge and experience, with a kind of a cool concept that's a little bit counterintuitive, comes into a business and suggests to you, hey, you should do this. And it's such an act of faith on our part as business owners to let go of the vine and trust. And I've had that happen in our business, where some things are maybe counterintuitive to what I think, but it's just like, okay. But again, with that comes a great responsibility on you, the advisor, the consultant, or the coach, or whatever you call yourself. How is that bearing the burden of helping somebody make these important financial decisions? And I guess as long as it all goes well, it's cool. But
I think because this one is so diametrically opposed to the standard model,
right?
That it tends to only take root in the right places. Guys who've already got that capability, already ready to think that way, and who grasp it, because the rest will shake their head and say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't see how that would work, and it's probably better therefore that they don't, right? You've got to believe in it. And as I said, my very first go around with it, putting it in front of a farmer, he actually took it and made it better. Right? And I was fortunate probably in that discussion, and it went well. And then other people copied, a few other people copied him, and variations on the same theme. So you don't have to. There was another one of his friends, actually, they sold half their land, sold it and leased it back, released the money, expanded their farming that way, and that was a husband and wife team super capable agronomists. So actually they suddenly leveraged their skills, 2 of them, across way more acres, right? That was a sensible business decision, right? Because they got the same gross margin on twice as many acres. That's going to be more profitable. Right?
Yeah.
And then a chunk of that money went into a related but non-farming business for a time, and then it came back into farming.
So if you're looking,
but they
to
took
scale,
very pragmatic decisions about the family farm, which is shot full of emotion. But
Yes.
it was a very, what's the word? Very sort of progressive family. They were able to talk about that with the older generation, and everybody was okay with what they did, and it worked very well, for them as a family.
and that's a big deal. We talked about it a lot yesterday.
So they didn't go to 20% invested in land. They still probably had 50% of their wealth in land, but they strategically redeployed a whole lot of their capital into higher, and they were confident enough in their ability as agronomists that they could manage that working capital, and they did. They were very effective.
So if you're looking to scale,
Yeah.
if you're a young guy, and if you're both,
So the sooner you get to scale, the more wealth you will build in the long run. which people seem to like that, right?
well, if I could be so bold to say too, scaling is a vastly different proposition in life than being a self-employed individual.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, once you can scale things and sort of get things to the stage where, now I can have this person or that, it's all about who, not how. Then all of a sudden you're ready for bigger opportunities. You're fresh. It pains me to see people in business, because I relate, but people that are working extremely hard to build a business, but trying to do it all themselves, and that's very challenging.
Well, that's the dilemma that entrepreneurs always face, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is you
See,
reach
is it
that
scalable?
point where you hit the ceiling,
Mm-hmm.
so much to be done, but it all has to be done by me.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I blow through that ceiling now, right? I mean, in professional firms, they call that leverage, right? That's like, well, then you've got to start training people. Now, in a perfect world, that's your children, that's your successors. But if that comes upon you, that point in your business, farming or not, right? It comes upon you, and you either don't have any kids that are interested or they're 5 years old, then, you have to find another way, right? Which means, you're going to have to hire some people, and you're going to have to become a trainer, or somebody is, right? And you're going to have to learn to trust, and all hard things for a lot of entrepreneurs, right?
It is.
To let go of the reins.
Yeah, it still hurts all the time. So how do you see things evolving for you then within the company and the industry? You seem really passionate about this particular space right now.
I am. I'm nearly 60 years old, Dan. So, this is an unexpected sort of plus in my career, right?
Cool.
I was, 15 years or whatever at Myers Norris Penny, and what was in front of me was another 5 or 6 or 7 years of that, whatever, and retirement and comfort and so on. And I didn't really have to change anything, but this opportunity with GARS came up, and I've known Grant and that gang since I first arrived in Saskatchewan. I've known them literally for that amount of time, and followed the fortunes of the company. And Grant and I had talked once or twice, and this was just the right time. It was kind of a nice way to finish a career. So downloading as much of this as possible into the GARS team is a key.
You're doing
priority.
a lot of mentoring and training. That's your role within GARS, or do you
no,
work with
not
clients a
really.
lot?
It's no, I don't work with clients a huge amount, but so transferring knowledge, which I've always enjoyed. I mean, either as a consultant or as a teacher or a mentor, right? And but also as we grow as a company. I mean, I think the bigger reasons for me being here are. I bring a lot of knowledge of agriculture with me, and as the company grows, we encounter new situations, new crops, new farming systems in new places, and needing somebody who can objectively look at those and pull them apart and look at what do we need to know about these in order to ensure these things. So many things on the radar. Potatoes, we've started to encounter more, right? So how do we underwrite potatoes? What are the risks? What does that look like? What's the right way to do this? And irrigated crops, cannabis, hemp, to name but a few. In the US, new crops, there. So that's really where I'll get most busy, is looking at a lot of data and helping the company and the reinsurers to position products, right, or our product in those markets as well. You know, I mean, our homeland is dryland grain in Saskatchewan. That's where we began, and we grew out from there. So we know that very well, right? We understand that very well. But you know, we come to Alberta, and now we start to run into other types of crop. And so how are we going to do that? And so, you know, I'm doing a lot of that. So all stuff I love and enjoy. I mean, you've had me talk about succession, and obviously I'm passionate about that, but really, you know, my roots are in all that data and those numbers and farmers and how they make money from farming. And the succession work that I did for 10 years was really a spin-off from that, because, you know, I'd grown to understand farm families and how they operate and the things that matter and so on. So I was maybe well suited to that.
Good. Well, I love the work you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Doing good work, disseminating that down through the company, out to the customers, and I like that you're changing the way people think. I mean, if nothing else, you can go forward with that in mind. I mean, you might not change everything in your operation tomorrow, but having an understanding of that.
Well, sometimes
I've never
it's
heard
just
of that
knowing
before,
that there's another way, right?
Yeah.
It actually doesn't have to be this way. It could be like this, or it could be something, you know, between those points, right? And that's often as enlightening as anything else, is realizing that I don't have to do it the way that my old man did it or grandpa did it. There's some alternatives here. And same with our product, right? That was a very novel idea.
Right. Yeah, it's gotten pretty big.
Yeah.
Sold a few acres this year, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. Every year we've sold more, so that's good, right?
Dave Sullivan likes that.
Yes.
Oh, you gotta have him. Well, I've had him on the show, in the previous incarnation of the show. I definitely want to catch up with Grant, fellow strategic coach student. I'm supposed to go hardcore on the strategic coach. Just love talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, you should
I know he
catch
does
up
too.
with
As soon as we met, and I was like, this is like lightning crackling.
So Sully.
I've heard about him too, but I have not met
his
him.
mum and dad actually were some of the first Saskatchewan farmers I worked with once
cool.
I got to Canada, and they introduced me to this large bratty kid, and and then many years later I hired him, right? And he and I worked. He and I worked together, and then
he's amazing.
Then we went our different paths, and here we are. I sort of found my way back, and I'm working with Dave again, and the kid's done well.
Dave thinks I'm amazing. Dave's
he's
just
a super
huge fan
smart
of mine.
guy.
Dave just thinks I'm everything in that, all that in a bag of chips.
Does he? Does he really?
I don't know.
I always worried about his judgment.